welcome to this session talking about how to retain and inspire your top sales team members. Today's topic really focuses on turnover. The key issue here is that research has shown that the 80-20 rule is true. That is, 80% of your revenue probably comes from 20% of your sales team. And some minor variations based on industry. And understanding that these top performing contributors are so critical to the organization when you think about how long it takes to replace them, how long it takes to hire them, understanding how to retain them can be very, very important. And I want to go over some of the research that I've been working on identifying and understanding who and what the top producers are, that key intersection of how much you pay them and the performance you get for it, thinking about how you optimize the career path of top reps, and finally identifying some of the risks in sales team turnover. My name is Eric Charles. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Marketing for the Xactly Corporation. I also serve as a technical advisor for a variety of other technology firms, such as JobScore and Compass. I've written articles on issues impacting the modern CFO, maximizing ROI and acquisitions, and other places. So I work for the Xactly Corporation. We've been around for over 13 years, and what I've been able to leverage is the bit in that top left quadrant, which is 13 years of empirical compensation data collected over our entire customer base. The great thing is we have been collecting anonymized and aggregated information in such a way through our master data model to be able to run a variety of high-end academic credentialed statistical models to be able to see what's going on and test our hypotheses. So let me talk a little bit about what we've heard so far and what we've seen, and a few other things that might actually help you do a better job of taking care of your team. First, I always like to start with the Gallup status of the global workplace, where they talk about the challenge of employee engagement, where only 15% of the average company is truly engaged, 67% are not, and 18% are actively disengaged. So this is across the globe in an anonymous survey run by Gallup, and this has a huge impact because the problem with this poor engagement is that if you have a company that is actually much higher, if you've got more engaged employees, you get better customer metrics from everything that you will check. Okay, you'll get higher productivity from the team, you'll get higher sales and higher profitability. So anything you can do to better engage your sales team will pay off in the long run. The other one is this is a slightly different study. There's a second study that I looked at that said that 20% of the reps brought in more than 60% of the company's revenue. This is a CSO Insight study instead. As I mentioned, I was kind of arguing that I believe it's closer to 80% based on my data set. But a big issue that is the C, B, and A players. Okay, our C players are the ones that we could arguably say, why did you hire them in the first place? Our B players are what are oftentimes called the frozen middle. Those are the people that, they cluster right around quota and are good. They're just not necessarily great. And finally, we get to the A players, and that's that 20%, that top 20% that we want to make sure that we don't lose no matter what. Because if they quit, we lose money. It's that average 9 months or so to replace somebody, train them up, and get a full quota-bearing rep in their place. So most of us can't afford that. Matter of fact, the Society of Human Resources Management started talking about this, where entry-level employees cost 30 to 50% of their annual salary just to replace. Mid-level, 150%. Specialized high-level, 400% of their salary to replace. So anything we can do to control those costs is important to us, and what we can do around it. So we run our own sales compensation survey, where we found that 90% of the companies who participate in the survey, they were looking for a turnover rate of under 15% of their sales teams, and less than half were actually able to achieve that. And if I then come over to the Bridge Group survey of 2015, a couple of years earlier than that, they found a 34% average turnover among their participating companies in the survey. But excuse me, those with less than 25% turnover had 12% more reps hitting quota. So you see all these issues. Turnover is very costly. It's not just the rep time and the money you'll pay to the recruiters and the training time and your sales enablement folks. It costs you money. Looking at some of the historical Xactly Insights data set, this is where I was seeing the turnover by industry. And again, we're looking for SaaS at 29%, media and internet companies as high as 51% in the SMB side of it, or 33% in the media and internet for large enterprise. This deck will be made available from the fine folks here working on the Army of Sales Reps presentation. So if we then come over here, and I want to talk about Josh Bersin at Deloitte, he had a great post where he talked about, if you're going to talk about the cost of turnover, these are all of the factors you should think about. Your direct cost of hiring a new person, the cost of onboarding, the lost productivity, the lost engagement, the industry-specific training that you have, because a lot of us will reach out beyond our very specific space to get a sales rep. The training costs, which can be, this says 10 to 20% of employee salary over 2 to 3 years. I don't know if he necessarily includes in terms of a sales rep of time to become a full quota-bearing rep. And then the cultural impact, of course. Every time somebody leaves, everybody notices. So now let's talk about the intersection of pay and performance, because this actually impacts turnover, because what we're talking about is the sales perspective. And Hart and Holmstrom received the Nobel, more accurately, the award in honor of Alfred Nobel in economics for their piece of principal agent utility and how it's related to risk. And this is showing the difference between, on one side, here on the left-hand side of the screen, it's the utility of the principal. That is you, the employer, which is what you got out of them, the benefit minus what you paid them. Whereas on the side of the sales rep, our agent, utility of the agent, we have the effort, the expected payment, the risk of not earning that payment, and that's their utility. You can see these are two very different thought processes. And so our sales reps are looking at it that way, and it also kind of impacts the benchmarks on payment. This is where I say a lot of us will schedule, and I've seen this time and time again at my clients for my consulting practice, is that we will go and design a comp plan and we'll say, well, at target, we pay at the market rate. But we're not trying to hire reps that earn them, that hit the market quota. We want reps that knock it out of the park. And this is why I talk about the competitive compensation for top performers. Are you comparing your entire payout curve of your new incentive comp plan, your commission plan, versus the payout curve of your industry and the payout curve of those industries where you either hire reps out of or lose reps to? You've got to be looking at all of that when you build out the comp plan if you want to keep the right pay for performance. You've got to be keeping an eye on yearly quota attainment distribution of your firm to make sure you understand who it is you need to protect. We talk about that a little bit more with that 80-20 rule. And even later, you need to be looking at what the impact is of tenure on quota attainment. If you're going to really want to know what's going on, you should be constantly tracking what your current quota attainment is of your reps each month versus the same period last year. This is going to be a huge indicator because that's one of the things they look at. They say, well, last year, by this time of the year, I had made this much money, closed this many deals, brought in this much revenue, cashed this many checks. And if those curves if they're not beating last year's curve, then, or at least matching it, they're starting to think maybe last year was a blip and I'd be looking for something else. Then you want to start breaking that down. This is a quota attainment by tenure. I like the candlestick style of graphing where I look at, say last year, reps with less than, reps, last year versus this year of reps with less than a year of experience, reps with 1 to 3 years of experience, reps with 3 to 5 years of experience, and reps with 5+ years of experience. Each one of these tells me a different story in terms of the width of the band, where the median is, where the highs and the lows are, and what should we be doing about it. This single graph can be a great way of having a conversation. I actually love to put it all together on a single dashboard where I could be looking at all of my team. I can be looking at, in this case, I'm looking at it as a manager, Barbara Wilson. I can be looking at Barbara's specific quota attainment, what the yearly quota distribution is, what the annual quota attainment is, what the sticks look like. And even I've got a warning window here of I've got a single rep right now who's had really high attainment for several periods. Might be something, to keep an eye on. These know that that's one of your top high performers. I call that, have you taken your rock star out to lunch recently? The other thing I like to look at is pay data, where I'll put quota attainment on one axis and on-target earnings or incentive attainment on another one, and I start looking to see what's happening there. Now, we would hope for a nice smooth curve stretching, starting low left and top right, but we can actually see in this case, there are a few people that are, for example, making a lot of money without actually bringing in the quotas. Now, maybe that's because they were on a ramp quota and they knocked it out of the park. They are leveraging the spiffs, or they're gaming the plan in some other way. But this is a great type of display that you want to run to see what's going on out in the field. And then as we start digging deeper, what we can start looking at is this concept of like, okay, if we find a person, what is their incentive attainment, actual versus target? Where do they rank on a firm percentile? And then you might want to see, in this case, I'm pointing out that the reps in the same quota attainment range have a lower incentive attainment and a lower pay for performance ratio. So what's going on with Patricia Jones, and how did she figure out the game? Which then leads us to this conversation I'd like to have of why you have to look beyond just the average pay. It's what I started with in this section and what I want to end with a little bit. Are you offering less incentive compensation to top performers versus their peers? Are you offering too much incentives to your low performers versus your peers? Because when you do that, you can get a really messed up quota distribution curve with too many reps on the low end and not enough up at the top. So last, a little bit of analysis you should be doing. So now let's go down to the sales rep career path. And I touched on this one a little bit earlier. So remember when I said the 80-20 rule? Well, here's getting a little more specific. Break it out into a couple industry segments where it takes, 80% of the revenue comes from 24.5% of the sales reps in something generically called technology. Pro services, 24.3, manufacturing, 20.3. And then if I take my entire data set when I ran this, it was 21.2. That's just more of a benchmark for you to see it there. Next, think about this concept of the value of experience, however. In any given industry, the longer somebody is in the job, there's different payouts. Now, we found that in professional services companies, after a while, they seem to understand the industry pretty cleanly. If I, however, look at manufacturing, they keep on getting value through a year, then start to flatten out, get into anything in that information technology space, and man, it just keeps on ramping up year after year after year. I capped my graph here at 60 months tenure to show what the value is and how the performance, how what the reps are bringing in was mattering. And this comes into play. So if I redo my 80-20 analysis, 80% of the revenue, what percent of reps do I need? And this is if I only look at reps who have been there at least 1 year. I don't have any brand new reps running around, nobody in training, anything like that. And here I'm looking at closer to 33% of reps bring in 80% of the revenue once I control for how long they've been around. So you want to take a look at that on your side. Now, we've identified these rock stars and we've talked about why tenure matters, why we want to keep them around. The next thing is we want to talk about who do we want to put into our management places. And this is some information taken from some research by Alan Benson that was in Harvard Business Review recently. And this is where he talks about, the truth is if you're a number one sales rep at a company, you've got a 200% higher chance of promotion. If you're just in the top half of sales reps, you've got a 50% higher chance of promotion. If you're in the top half of reps, but you know how to sell the company's entire catalog. This is where, Alan was able to look through some data that showed those reps that actually can sell something from every bucket the company has. You've only got a 40% higher chance of promotion. However, if we promote a person of each of these archetypes into management, this is what we get. Yes, a rock star improves team performance by 20%. A top half of the reps increases team performance by 20%. The ones that know how to sell the whole catalog increase team performance by 40%. So we might be looking at the wrong things and instead promoting the wrong people into management roles. Okay, so that gives us a feel for career pathing in my quick look. So now let's talk about why turnover matters a little bit more. I want to dive deeper into that subject here towards the end. We did a survey of sales leaders and we asked them what do they really care about in terms of data and information for making analyses. And what they told us is sales performance was number one, 40%, pipeline management, 28%, churn retention, was only at 20%, and forecasting skill on data was at 12%. So the data priorities were a little off here. Sales managers are looking for better data tools. Next thing I want to talk to you about, when do reps leave? And this is where I like to say, you've got 3 spikes. You've got the first month of the year and the last month of the year. And then in the dead center of the year, there are 3 measurable, statistically significant spikes in sales team turnover, sales member turnover. Keep an eye on this, because this is when reps suddenly start looking around thinking about, maybe it's time for me to switch sides, go someplace else. If you're going to track the turnover, when I look at this, I like to look at the turnover among managers and the turnover among sales reps. In this case, I was looking at enterprise level sales reps and seeing how it varies in different industries. It's interesting. You can sometimes see in which industries as a whole, is it the rep blamed for poor performance, or is the manager blamed? This is also something to think about if you yourself are a sales rep thinking about becoming a sales manager. Where do you want to go? So what I like to do is really start digging into headcount, turnover, and tenure data. You can see with this in this report, what I've done is I've done a series of buckets of less than a year up to that 5+ year with the average, and then what quota attainment was at each of these buckets. This is what I talked about, like understanding how turnover impacts things and how turnover can cost me some revenue. And then I also have an analysis here of just total turnover, of similar sized teams. This is a team versus team analysis. So this is the type of in-depth analysis you want to be doing, but you want to be automating this. And I'll freely admit, this is straight out of Xactly's Insights product that our companies can use, and it's updated constantly with market data, monthly with market data, and daily with internal data. So when you have all this information together, you can start building a prediction engine of how you might lose some people. This is kind of like the fire danger rating for those of us that I feel backpacking in the high country during the recent droughts we've had out here. So when you're talking about turnover prediction, the kind of data we look at is like manager to the rep relationships. How many people are you managing? How long have they been on your team? Things like that. Obviously the pay information and how that compares. Historical sales performance, time and company, turnover of other reps, and then actually a measurement of the complexity of the compensation plan has an impact. Every single one of these has an impact on predicting and driving sales turnover. We then applied a machine learning development process. This is where we would, come in, formulate the problem, prepare the data sets, play around with it, and then we're constantly coming back and building, tuning, and validating the models to make sure it works. We follow the scientific method. You don't just go hunting for answers. You develop a hypothesis and test it in it. You've got to watch out for the noise. Some of the statistical challenges we've been running into, even with our data set, is how do we manage the outliers or missing values, normalizing some data to try and carry it across multiple companies. What level of variance and near zero variance do we require, discrete and binary data sets, and then other categorical features within the data set. And we started coming into this to give you an idea of, like, if there's been no recent sales credits, a rep hasn't put anything up on the board, what sort of triggers should we be looking at? Is it 3 months without sales credits? Is it 6 months without sales credits? Is it 3 days if you're in a retail or a luxury retail business where you're constantly moving business? And follow-up questions. And then how do we define high and low turnover, high and low performance, and then pay for performance discrepancy? Each one of these, we try to build out mathematical triggers, and you should be doing the same for your firm, and then figuring out what types of follow-up questions and what additional data might we need. This is how you start building a turnover prediction model. Down the road, we're actually looking further at some sort of a natural language processing that we'll be adding into our software to make it all work. So I always like to say, I'm talking about some very far-looking, things like this. But let's face it, the paradigm has shifted. When I got started in this world, I was running Lotus 1-2-3, later Excel, and the like with static data. Then we started getting various automated systems with some basic reporting in them. And now what we're looking at is a world of predictive analytics. And for all of us, we can see predictive analytics in 2 places. The first is Netflix, when it tries to tell you what would you like to watch next. The other might be Amazon. You go in, click on a book, and all of a sudden it tells you people who also bought this book also bought what. And it's a whole stack of different books that you can pick up, say, on this compensating the sales force in this case. So these get in the way. So Amazon has already figured out how to make these predictions. We can do the same. So the idea is we can start getting ahead of these trends. I mean, CFOs believe AI is going to have an impact. Most companies say the real-time ability to look at changes and pay for performance. Ventana Research said that is critical, and greater quota attainment of SPM over non-SPM users. This is just a higher quota attainment. Companies that automate this process and get the data together actually have higher corporate performance. So ask yourself at the end of this, what was your last year's turnover? When did it occur? How much is regrettable? What's it take to recover? Answer those at least. Now, compare last year to year to date. What's changed? What improvements? And how do you compare against like your industry and your talent sources from a benchmarking perspective? This is the absolute minimum you should be doing if you want to clean up your turnover. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. Again, my name is Eric Charles. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Marketing for Xactly. I get to spend a lot of time playing around with their data sets and looking at new things for our software to do. I'm always interested in people reaching out to me. You can drop me an email. This is my true corporate email, not some spam filtered one, echarles@xactlycorp.com. You can also follow Xactly on Twitter, or you can also follow me on Twitter at EricChaz. Thank you very much and have a great day.